the Global Energy Leaders Podcast, Episode 18.
Welcome to the Global Energy Leaders Podcast, powered by R Squared Global.
Welcome to the Global Energy Leaders Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Ray, where we talk to the biggest names in energy, and today is no exception as we have on Alex Epstein to talk about his book, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. And before we get into it, a couple of things that we're going to talk about after the interview is we have our book winner from last month, and we're giving away a copy of Alex's book, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, and you can find out how to win that after the interview, so stay tuned for that. So let me kind of set the table of what's going to happen on this interview. Is I've asked Alex to come on. He was very gracious to come on, and I said I want to play kind of devil's advocate. Throw out some of the things that you may hear a lot, or we as the listeners, or people in the energy business may hear a lot of objections, and I throw it out. And one of the things that Alex does, as you'll see, is he just completely dismantles me. So if you enjoy hearing me getting dismantled, well, here's your chance for that. But furthermore, is if you listen to how he answers as a philosopher. And so a lot of the questions that I ask him and I throw out his way, he doesn't give me what I want. And that's good, because that's how, as energy professionals, we need to think about these questions and these objections is how should we think about this answer and how should we respond? So before we jump into it, as I mentioned, Alex Epstein is the author of The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels and the founder of the Center for Industrial Progress. We'll link to a bunch of his stuff in the show notes, so go check that out. He's got several different things that he's working on, and they're kind of neat little projects. You should go check them out. So without further ado, here's my interview with Alex Epstein. Well, Alex, thank you so much for coming on the show. How are you doing today?
I am doing great.
Okay, well, let's give the audience, kind of set the table with your book and your company, kind of give just a quick bio of who you are and what you do and what you're kind of about.
All right. I am a philosopher, which means I'm interested in the fundamental methods by which we think about important questions in life. And about 10 years ago, I became fascinated with how we think about issues of energy and environment, both because I realized that energy was the fundamental industry because it powers every other industry, and because I thought the thinking in energy, and particularly its relationship to environment, was staggeringly illogical and made it almost impossible for the general citizen to have any idea what the truth is about various energy sources and what the right kind of energy policy should be. So I endeavored to understand that for myself. I came up with many counterintuitive to people conclusions, particularly about our use of fossil fuels. And ultimately, I wrote The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, and also tried to, and ultimately succeeded at, working with fossil fuel companies and other energy companies to tell the world why what they do is very good, to teach their employees why it's good, to teach their employees how to teach others how it's good, and in general to make, to turn the industry from a thought follower to a thought leader. Because if the industry doesn't stand up effectively for what it does, it makes it very hard for the rest of us. So it's a combination these days. Insofar as I'm in energy, I'm studying some other things as well, but insofar as I'm in energy, it's all about empowering the general public, empowering ambitious citizens, with the right knowledge and thinking methods and communications techniques, and then empowering persecuted industries, particularly the coal, oil, and gas industries, with the right knowledge and thinking methods and techniques.
Great. And so for the listeners, real quick, I just want to get this out there so everyone knows. Alex has been very gracious to come on, A, for starters, but B, he's agreed to let me play the devil's advocate. So I'm going to throw out the questions that he may hear, objections to his book. They're not my positions, but they are things that he may hear and he's addressed in his book. With that being said, we're not going to cover hardly anything that's in the book. You need to get the book. This book for me was very monumental in shifting my thinking and how to deal with some of these objections that I've heard in the past. Also, we're giving away a copy of this book this month, and so, again, this is me playing devil's advocate, and Alex is just a gracious host. The only thing he has agreed is not to ask me how to prove what I'm asking him, because I'm not trying to prove it. I want him to defend his position, and he's going to do a masterful job, I'm sure of it. And that's what we've agreed upon, right, Alex?
Masterful job. That you've set quite an expectation. Now they're just going to wait for it to be non-masterful.
I'm sorry, he didn't agree to do a masterful job. That was just my high hope there. So, okay, so first question, me playing devil's advocate, let's get into it. How can you write a book that's called The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels when climate change is proven science?
Well, the reason to write a moral case for anything is if something is indeed moral and it's under moral attack. So I wouldn't write the moral case for, say, computer printers because, while they are moral, they're not under moral attack. So the reason to write a book on the moral case for fossil fuels is if you believe that the moral attack on fossil fuels, which anyone would acknowledge, is wrong, and there is in fact a moral case for fossil fuels. And then that's why you would do it. And then the question is, well, why would you believe that fossil fuels are moral if whatever you said, it's a proven fact that climate change is real? And I think that question exhibits one of the problems that motivated me to get involved in this, which is a very sloppy and disintegrated thinking about issues. So if you think about what is climate change is a really vague way of putting what we're trying to get at. What we're trying to get at is that when we use fossil fuels, we increase the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere so far from 0.03% of the atmosphere to 0.04% of the atmosphere. And those CO2 molecules have a certain kind of heat trapping effect, at least when you isolate them in a lab. And so it's important to assess how significant that effect is and how that compares with the benefits of using fossil fuels. So with anything, you want to know, the unique benefits of doing it and the unique risks of doing it. So it's completely compatible with the moral case for fossil fuels to say you believe that CO2 has some warming effect. You could think it was a positive effect. You could think it was negative, but not that big a deal. You could think the unique positives far outweighed it. It's exactly like saying, well, how can you make a moral case? How could you write a book called The Moral Case for Vaccines if it's a proven fact that vaccines have side effects?
That's a great point. I love that. Well, see, you're getting me out of devil's advocate role. I got to be careful here. Okay, so back to devil's advocate. Okay, glaciers are melting, the tide's rising. We're going to be underwater before too long. Shouldn't we stop using fossil fuels so that we have somewhere to live?
Well, glaciers are melting, the tides are rising is a statement that could be made at a much greater degree of magnitude 10 or 20,000 years ago when we're coming out of the last ice age. So one of the reasons why climate change is a term that should not be used to refer to a specific contribution by human beings is because climate change is a constant of nature, and things like melting ice or increasing ice or rising sea levels and falling sea levels, those are just those are aspects, those are inherent in nature. So human beings, if that's the case, and if it's the case that it can be naturally very dramatic, I mentioned that sea level rises and melting were much more extreme thousands of years ago when human beings were around. The key issue then is not trying to not change anything as if nature is perfect. The issue is, can we use technology to neutralize the different threats that nature poses? And so technology is the number one determiner of environmental quality. Nature doesn't give us a safe environment that we make dangerous. It gives us a dangerous environment that we make safer and safer and safer. And that applies to our climate. We've never been safer from climate than ever. I document in the book how climate-related deaths, so deaths from floods and storms and heat and cold, are down 98% over the last 80 years when significant CO2 emissions began. Air quality is better, water quality is better. All of this is due to technology, and technology is powered by energy technology. Somebody pointing out change in nature, whether it's human influenced or non-human influenced, that's not an argument against technology and our most affordable source of energy, which is fossil fuels. That's an argument for it.
Well, let me ask you like this then. Are we making it worse by putting CO2 emissions into the atmosphere? Are we speeding up this process?
Well, it depends what you mean by making it worse. So one thing that's really important in thinking is to know what is the standard by which we are evaluating better and worse, good and bad. So in the moral case for fossil fuels, I call this a standard of value. So if you say, well, we're making something worse, well, let's say that you had a vaccine for something, like you had a polio vaccine. And for whatever reason, the polio vaccine made the natural instances of polio 10% greater, but you could vaccinate everyone against them. Let me ask you, has the situation gotten better or worse?
Right. No, I know where you're going.
So the issue of environment environment is always an interaction between human beings and their surroundings. So when you talk about environmental quality, that's an issue where you have to. It's not just what's going on out there or what's going on in here. It's both. The same with disease. Like again, the issue of polio is a good example. It's like, no, this polio situation has gotten a lot better. So the temperature situation has gotten a lot better because we can deal with it. Now, if there's something, that doesn't mean it could be that we can improve. We can always improve. So let's say an upward impact on temperature was negative, which I don't think can be proven at all. But let's say it had some negative element, and you could, without compromising the positive of cheap, plentiful, reliable energy, if you could avoid that, then you would do it. But you have to look at the full context of the impact, and people tend to only look at what they think are negative impacts, but they don't recognize the fact that the most important determinant of environmental quality of a livable environment is the state of technology.
Okay, so let me ask you this then. So you mentioned a minute ago that, and you talked about in the book extensively, that it's hard to live in nature without some sort of technology to protect you, to give you clean, reliable, cheap energy. But what do you say to people who say, okay, well, look at China, the air pollution. That's not coming from the environment. That's something that we're creating. Or these big cities with these smog alerts, and you have all this stuff that's nothing to do with nature. That's something that we're producing, and we're harming people's health by that way.
Right. So any technology can be misused, for one, and any technology will have risks and side effects that need to be managed in one way or another. And so in thinking about it, you want to use the technology in the way that's best for human flourishing. And there are a lot of variables that go into that, including, let's say, how wealthy you are. So the wealthier you are, the more you can afford to minimize anything you don't like, including certain forms of air pollution. So I think there are a variety of reasons why China has much more air pollution than a lot of other places, many relating to the fact that it's not a free society and doesn't have proper policies protecting individual rights. And thus the plants aren't using technologies that plants in the U.S. have that say, burn coal and keep the air very clean. So that's one variable. Another variable, though, is that they are poorer. So it's very understandable for countries that are poorer and that have to choose between, like, if to produce energy, they need to have a certain amount of smog, they can decide that it's worth it. And if you look at their life expectancy, it has increased massively. So it's, again, a situation where people are really obsessed with any real or imagined negatives of fossil fuels or misuses, and they are completely indifferent to the positives. And that kind of bias, I can talk about why that exists, although as the devil, you're not going to want to admit your bias. But as the devil, you have a very strong bias, and it's important for at least the listeners to see that the devil is not honestly trying to figure out what's best for human life. He's very suspiciously trying to attack something that a lot of people are benefiting from without considering the full context. And so as a result, he's trying to make them starve, because without energy, you don't have food production, and you starve in many different aspects of life. And the reason I'm focusing on the particular devil asking me questions is because that devil is governing the thought of the world. That is, there is a systematic bias against an objective look at how fossil fuels impact human flourishing. And it's important to understand that there's a bias, and then to understand the cause of that bias so that we can avoid it ourselves.
We'll get back to our interview with Alex Epstein in just a second, but first, let's hear from our sponsor. Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at www.audibletrial.com/Ryan. And the reason we did this is quite simple. We keep having on these authors who have amazing books, and when I say I've read the books, I've actually listened to them. I've shared my audio files with a few of these people, because one of the neat things about Audible is you can share one free book from your library to a friend. And so I've shared the Moral Case of Fossil Fuels and the Frackers, because those are books I just absolutely loved. And I've talked to you about them. We brought the authors on to interview them. So here's what you can do. You can go listen to those books on Audible with your free 30-day trial. You get one book you can download for your first month. And if you're not interested in those books, they have 180,000 others to choose from. And I could give you recommendation after recommendation. If you've got any questions, reach out to me. I can tell you about sales books, marketing books, business books. They've got it all. audibletrial.com/Ryan is where you can go to get your free audiobook and your free 30-day trial, where you can listen to your audiobook on your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or any other MP3 player. Absolutely, and I do want to take the devil's advocate hat off, but I have one more question as the so-called devil here, and it's not the first time I've been called the devil, so it's too familiar for me on some level. The long-term impact on the environment. We talked about the good and the bad, or you said, okay, well, you got to measure the good versus the bad, but the case could be made that we're doing too much long-term detrimental impact to the environment, where we will not be able to sustain this type of life expectancy, as you used, 10, 20, 100 years down the road, because we're constantly tearing up the environment and it just cannot keep up with what we're doing to it.
I mean, I think you use the word could. I mean, that could be true if there were any evidence for it. So what's the evidence? I know I'm not supposed to ask you for evidence.
I was going to say we agreed on that.
I mean, I can give the evidence. I'll give the argument. I mean, there's a couple of varieties of this. The basic premise behind it's important to just understand the whole philosophy that's causing this antagonism to fossil fuels. It's not a philosophy that measures things by human flourishing. We're clear on that, because they don't care about human flourishing. They just use it as an excuse to attack fossil fuels, where they see it as negative, but they don't care at all about the positive. So the goal is not human flourishing. So what's the goal? The goal of the prevailing philosophy is the green philosophy, which means to minimize impact. So the idea is minimizing human impact on the planet. Nature, all the other organisms and phenomena impacting nature are great. That's totally fine, but human beings impacting nature is considered immoral. So the human race is singled out as a blight on the earth. Why are we a blight, and why should our standard be basically we should be as small a presence on the planet as possible? So the real standard of value for the so-called green movement is dehumanization. The best planet is the one that would exist if human beings had never existed. So why do we have a standard? And this is all it's implicit in the idea of minimizing impact. Dehumanization is how we measure the goods. That is a very perverse thing if you care about humans, which I do as head of the Center for Industrial Progress and the new Human Flourishing Project at humanflourishingproject.com, by the way. It's there's something that's so wrong with this. Now, how could someone possibly have the idea that we should measure good by the extent to which we can get human presence off the planet? Well, part of it is that human beings are considered a uniquely bad creature because we are polluters and we are parasites. So the idea of polluter means that our fundamental nature is to contaminate a pristine planet. And parasites is the idea that our fundamental nature is to deplete natural resources at unfair and artificially fast rates. And so the idea is the more time we spend on the planet doing what we want, the dirtier it will be and the fewer resources that it'll have. Now, that would be unfortunate, but fortunately, it's completely untrue. If you compare our environment 300 years ago with today, it's infinitely cleaner today, and we have infinitely more usable resources. And both are the same basic cause. Technology enables us to reduce and neutralize nature's many, many threats, and technology enables us to transform nature's unlimited raw materials into usable resources. So now aluminum is a resource it didn't used to be, oil is a resource it didn't used to be, and we can constantly make new things into resources. So this view of human beings as polluter parasites, it's completely not true. What we are is we are perfectors and we are producers. And if you get that, then it's a joke to think, oh, can we sustain this? I mean, we can't. Not only can sustain it, it can be way better. So as long as we're free to create value and to neutralize threats, the world is going to look way better in 100 years. So it's only this polluter parasite view that, and this real hatred of human beings, really low view of human beings, and worship of everything non-human that leads us to these inane predictions, which, because they're inane, they always come false.
Okay, well, I'm going to take off the devil's advocate hat. I was not a worthy foe, and so I apologize for that. But
you're not the first, or even the 20th.
Well, at least to my credit, I probably wasn't sincere, and they were. So maybe I can at least hang my hat on that. Okay, so I want to transition and team up with you here for a second. Not that you need me by any stretch of the imagination, but I want to walk through just a couple things before I let you go. First off, let's talk about, and I kind of threw it out earlier, hey, all the scientists in the world agree about climate change, and you've kind of touched on that directly, but I think there's a couple things that may want to circle back around on. Can you just kind of walk the audience through how these projects are funded and how that process works? And maybe not everybody's really aware that you can't do some of these climate change study projects unless you're going to get a certain result. And so could you just kind of expound on how that works? And so why we constantly see these high statistics of, well, all these scientists are agreeing on this?
I really want to encourage people not to just pick up common terminology. If you think common thinking is bad about something, the first thing to question is the terminology, because our terminology is the way we classify things. And, we classify things into certain categories, which are our concepts, and then that's the only way that we can make generalizations about the world. So something is real, something isn't, something is good, something isn't. So a crucial part of it is that we put everything into the right classification, or you can think of it as a file folder. And so climate change is a garbage classification to describe an impact of human activity because it is already a constant of nature. So I would just say, if you want to be more exact about it, just say CO2 or man-made CO2 or the climate impact of CO2. But it's important to be precise. Now, and even there, then you realize, oh, that's something where, okay, now I know what we're talking about. And then, one logical question is, okay, well, not only how much is known about this, but what is the claimed impact of CO2? Because it's often put as binary, is there an impact or not? But the real question is there a catastrophic impact? What's the magnitude of impact? And that's where there's a lot of dispute, and that's why the climate catastrophists want to pretend that everybody agrees with them. So they blend it all into this jumble called climate change, because they can say, oh, you agree with climate change, and then they'll act like you agree with climate catastrophe. It's not like agreeing to some impact doesn't mean catastrophic impact. So that's just thinking clearly about it, differentiating between mild and catastrophic impacts, and isolating what's going on as not climate change, but impact of man-made CO2. Now, in terms of what you mentioned with the government, it's a real phenomenon where anytime the government is involved in science, it's a monopoly phenomenon. So you have the government, which is giving out huge amounts of money to particular scientists to do particular projects. Now, different scientists have different ideas about what projects should take priority, and they have different assumptions about what the results will be. And so if the government is involved in science, then it's the government making those determinations. The government has to decide, what to fund, including what questions to answer and what questions not to answer. And in the realm of climate, the question that is answered, the question that it is paying a lot of money to answer is, how are human activities screwing up the planet? That's essentially the question that everyone is paid to answer. It is paying nobody to answer the question of how are other what actually drives climate? And is it possible that CO2 is not a significant climate driver? That is not a question it wants answered. So it has redefined the field of climate science from understand climate to understand how human beings are destroying climate, which that is a built-in bias. And so instead of competitive science, where we have robust ideas that are challenged, we have monopoly science, where we have I think we have a very implausible idea that's pursued maniacally with billions and billions of dollars. And we also have a group of people who are beholden to the government. And thus, when the government says completely inane things that not even a lot of the wrong scientists believe, they go along with it and sign their name, because who writes their paychecks? So it's if you don't like monopolies in the market, how could you possibly like monopolies when it comes to ideas in science?
Okay, and then the follow-up to that would be is you've talked about this catastrophic climate change a few times. Can you just kind of break down, for the common man like myself at least, the problem with modeling? And there's a pattern if you look at climate change scientists, and I know you don't like that term, so catastrophic climate change scientists will say that the world's going to end, and all these people run around, and this is going to happen, and they constantly miss their mark. They hit it this date, you get to that date, nothing happens. And they're based on these models. And so could you just kind of walk us through the problem with using these models, and not necessarily that it's a bad thing in itself, but just how easy it is to get the model wrong?
Sure. In life, when we think about choices, we're always looking forward. So we want to know with a given course of action what will be its results in the future. So, for example, with fossil fuels, it's relevant to know its impacts in the past, but it's really relevant only to assess its impacts in the future. It's not, sometimes industry will talk about, fossil fuels have done so much for us, therefore we should like them. Well, that's kind of like, if fossil fuels were good, but they're not good anymore, then we can give them a gold watch and have them retire. But that's not the moral case for fossil fuels. The moral case for fossil fuels is these are vital fuels of the future that will be good for human beings. And in making those assessments, you need to assess certain kinds of future economic scenarios. But with this issue of CO2, there's also a question of what will happen as you put more CO2 in the atmosphere. And we always have to be open to the possibility that, open to the issue of how knowable is this at this stage? There's certain things that are just not knowable at any given stage in time, in any stage of knowledge of human development. That's just a common phenomenon. So one with climate prediction, you're dealing with an unbelievably complex system, which is, the global climate system, which just, you think about even how complex local weather is. I mean, this is a system that includes all that. We should expect that it's very unlikely somebody's going to do a good job. So when you hear these very definitive projections, I think it's grounds for suspicion. And then if we look at the predictions, guess what? People who have been paid to discover how fossil fuels are going to cause catastrophic warming, they have predicted very dramatic warming. And guess whether it was higher or lower than the actual warming? Well, it was much, much higher. Big surprise. So the amount of warming that's actually existed is pretty uninteresting. We don't know how much of it or what the relationship between CO2 is, because we just don't understand how all these things play out in the system. But there's nothing resembling a trend toward catastrophic warming, except in some of the models of people. Now, some of the models, even if they were right, which there's no evidence that they will be, that amount of warming would not be a particular problem. But yeah, it's kind of like, a child, like a 5-year-old can't do calculus. It's like, well, it's not his fault, but I'm not gonna do, I'm not going to engineer things based on his conclusions. And so I'm not going to make a lot of big life decisions based on climate predictors who can't predict climate.
Speaking of people who can't predict climate, when I first read your book, I found you on Twitter and said, I got to follow this guy. And you have a pinned tweet that's pure gold. And I'm assuming it's still there. I haven't looked. I should have looked for today. Has Al Gore decided to debate you yet?
I have a different pinned tweet now.
Okay, you've changed it.
Twitter.
Well, I should have checked that.
I had it there for a long time, and I may put it back. But I have one right now, which people should check out on Twitter, or you can go to industrialprogress.com, same thing. But I'm really into teaching people how to be more influential in their communication, particularly on these issues. So I just put together some materials. So I linked to those because I want to encourage. I have a lot of people who see me on Twitter, so I want to encourage them to check out some of our resources. But yeah, I offered Al Gore $100,000 to debate me, in part because he was part of a crusade along with state attorneys general to attack ExxonMobil, and also to they subpoenaed ExxonMobil, but then there were a bunch of people named in the subpoena, and my company, Center for Industrial Progress, was one of them, and we're not a company we're actually a for-profit think tank, so we don't accept donations from anyone. So none of the company's names should have been named, but certainly there was no reason to name us, except for the fact that I'm a prominent person in fossil fuels. So what that showed me is that the government is trying to intimidate me and others for having opinions that it dislikes. So it only, it funds opinions that it likes, or scientific, views, or even if wrong views that it dislikes. And I regarded that as bad, and I was very explicit with the Massachusetts Attorney General who led this, and then I was also very clear with Al Gore that I saw he had a speaking fee of $100,000, so I would personally pay it if he would come on the stage. But so anyone who knows Al Gore, send him my best.
Yeah, I had guessed that he hadn't taken you up on that. And so, okay, I want you to get out of here with anything you want to plug or promote. And I just want to say this before you do that. The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, guys, you need to check it out. For me, as someone who had a lot of questions about how to handle some of the stuff we talk about in the podcast, this book was really instrumental in going, okay, this is the proper way to think about it. Again, it didn't convert me. I just didn't know what to do with some of the information that I already knew at a much lower level than Alex does. He's obviously a wizard at this stuff, and I'm not even a Padawan. And so it's very helpful. And on the flip side, if you listen to Alex today and you go, hey, I'm not really sure about that, he lays it out in much more detail and presents a lot better arguments against his own stuff than I do in this interview. So check out the book. Alex, what else would you like to promote that we didn't get to? You mentioned a few things that we were going to link to in the show notes about the Human Flourishing Project. And so go ahead and plug and promote anything you'd like before we let you get off here today.
Sure. So just to integrate what I'm trying to do, well, really in my life, is I'm trying to get people. I want to give people the best knowledge possible about how to actually advance human flourishing. And I feel like there's a lot of information in the world, and we've really never had more good information about how to advance human flourishing. But it's just completely hidden in such a mess of junk and misinformation and bad thinking. And my goal is to get people really the right information in a form that they can use and apply and communicate to others. And that really involves philosophy, in particular it involves having a good framework to acquire information, to synthesize information, to apply information. So in the Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, I think I did that successfully and took this issue that there was a lot of confusion about and gave people a framework. And the core of the framework is human flourishing. Human flourishing is a standard by which we evaluate everything. We don't evaluate things by minimizing impact. We want human flourishing. That is the goal. That is the standard that we use. And there are other elements of the framework, like we need to always look at the full context. We need to have precise principles. We can't just use vague things like climate change. But with this kind of framework, I think the Moral Case for Fossil Fuels is very helpful. But it also needs to be applied other places. And so that's what the Human Flourishing Project is. It's taking what I call the Human Flourishing Framework, and it's using it to help you get the best knowledge in every field. So it's brand new. I'm really excited about it. That's at humanflourishingproject.com. So there's a preview podcast up there now, and you can enter in your info to get info once it launches fully on February 26th. And then the other thing is, my biggest stuff so far is on the website industrialprogress.com. That's my own area of expertise within human flourishing, energy, environment, industrial progress. And I would really encourage you, if you're interested in communication, again, put your name and email there, and you will get, I think, some really, really helpful things on communication that will enable you to be much more successful in conversations with people than you ever have been. So humanflourishing.com, industrialprogress.com, enter your info in both, and I think you'll get just a lot of powerful knowledge.
Absolutely. And when this podcast releases, it will be after February 26th. So your new podcast on humanflourishing.com will be out there. So we will make sure we link to that. And if you've already got some episodes released by then, we will put those out for people to find, and obviously link to your book and everything else we can find about you. You are a good source of knowledge. And I have given the book to several friends, and we've all read it, and colleagues, and everyone's excited to come on. I'm sorry I was not a worthy opponent for you today. I did my best, but I'm just nowhere near someone as your skill set. So it was an honor to talk to you. Your book was very helpful. It's been helpful for everyone that I've known that's read it. So thank you for the work that you did. Just on behalf of people who were looking for, as you said, the framework to kind of understand how to deal with these issues. And thank you for your time to come on the show today.
All right. Thanks a lot, Ryan.
Thanks to Alex for coming on. It was really great to talk to him, and enjoyed just kind of the banter there and just trying to ask him quote unquote tough questions. I didn't do kind of as good of a job as I would have hoped for, but it was fun nonetheless. So we have this month's winner, and it is Stokera. I think is how you pronounce that. Stokera. Stokera gave us a 5-star review. It says they love it. This is quickly becoming one of my most must-listen podcasts. The variety of topics and guests is excellent. Great work. Keep it up. Thanks for the great review. We appreciated it, and we appreciate all of our reviews. And so all you have to do to win, or all you had to do to win, was leave a written review on iTunes, and we really appreciate those. Those help spread the word for the podcast and live in the continental U.S. So, Stokera, send us a email. Use the contact form in the show notes, and we will get you the copy of the Frackers out in the mail very shortly. For next month, we are going to put up a link on our website, globalenergymedia.com, where you can go. It's a little pop-up, and you just type in your email address there, and you'll be registered to win. Again, all you have to do is go to globalenergymedia.com, and the pop-up will be there, and you just enter your email, and you will be entered to win for this month's drawing, where we give away a copy of The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. I have a couple other announcements I want to make, and one is we are doing a 100-day roundtable discussion on President Trump's first 100 days, and that will be coming out, I think, in the first week of May is when we're tentatively set to do that. We have on some Dr. Lawrence Fedewa's coming back on, and we have on David Blackman is coming on, who's actually been scheduled and will be interviewed on the show before that, and then he will come on again for the roundtable, and we're trying to finalize, I think, one more guest, and so more information about that will be coming. It's going to be a long-form roundtable discussion where we discuss energy policies that are affecting the U.S. oil and gas or energy economy in general that President Trump has implemented or removed or repealed in the first 100 days, and we're going to take a look at that. And also, we are looking to put out more than one show a week. I know we've historically done one show a week, and then the conference editions, we've kind of sprinkled them in there as they've come up, but we're looking to go to maybe 2-3 episodes a week. So we'd really love to hear from you. What would you like from us is if we go to 2 to 3 shows a week, what kind of topics could we cover that we haven't covered? Would you like more long-form stuff? Or is a 20 to 30-minute mark about where you would like to hear from us? So one final thing. I forgot to mention, our podcast was featured in the San Antonio Business Journal by my friend Sergio Chapa. And so we are going to link to that article in the show notes. And we are very thankful for Sergio getting with us and covering our podcast. It was a lot of nice things he said about us, and so we appreciate that. And he links to a lot of other good podcasts in the show. So don't forget to check out Sergio Chapa's article in the San Antonio Business Journal talking about our podcast and others. And if you want to reach out and connect with me, all the information is in the show notes. Guys, as always, until next time, keep climbing.
Thanks for listening to the Global Energy Leaders Podcast, powered by R Squared Global.